Here we are now in week 6, so getting fairly close to the end of this course, and time to really start pulling together the things that we've been reading about and discussing and learning about, and really thinking again about your uh, philosophy of youth ministry. So we're really going to start to get into that this week. Um, Talking about theological convictions, detecting our theological convictions, and articulating those theological convictions. That's really the heart of what a philosophy of youth ministry is about. And I really liked the opening, the intro section for this week that Kenda Creasy Dean wrote, which talks about the letter of introduction that this youth pastor, a potential youth pastor, writes to a congregation disclosing that he is HIV positive. And how does that relate to theological convictions? Well, how it relates is that the reason he disclosed this, he didn't have to, was because one of his key theological convictions was authenticity. That he needed to be authentic because he's trying to uh, teach kids to be authentic people and about openness and honesty. And so he felt that he needed to live that out. That even though he wasn't required to disclose any of this, his medical condition or his past, because again, if you do the reading, the question that inevitably comes up is, well, how did you get this? And everyone was advising him, well, tell them it's none of their business. It doesn't matter. But he went ahead and answered, and his reason was because of his core theological conviction being authenticity. So, having been through that process, of interviewing for ministry positions and introducing yourself to pastors, or having done this myself, introducing to pastors and to search committees and eventually to congregations and to youth groups. Having done that a number of times, it's not only it's different from other jobs that you might apply for. The kind of things that can come up seem a little bit unfair. Age, for example. Some people want, you may end up in trouble on both ends there, where maybe you're too young, too close in age to the youth, or that you're too old. Or a problem that I have had a lot is that being highly educated, having a PhD, or when I was working on my PhD, a lot of parents, a lot of pastors, a lot of committees felt that, would you really be able to come down to the level of youth? And so, in some ways, I felt like I was discriminated against for being educated, and more than once didn't get a job because of that. And thankfully, I think I kind of proved those people wrong in that I actually did quite well in youth ministry. But it's a different sort of animal than some other positions, and so you have to think long and hard about what are kind of the non-negotiables for you. What are your core theological and practical convictions that are the bedrock of your youth ministry, and that this is, when you introduce yourself to people, this is what you're going to put out there, that this is what my youth ministry is about. This is what I believe is most important. And so the reading this week looks at, it gives examples of 4 different possible theological convictions. Certainly not to say that these are the only 4 you could choose from, but these are examples of what those might look like. And so the first one, the first chapter, deals with repentance as a... Yeah, my dog's whining back there. She must have to see someone walking by. This is what she does every time someone walks down the street. But, the first one is repentance. So what, repentance as sort of the core of a youth ministry. The second one, back. I stopped to go get rid of the dog. So again, that first theological conviction, first chapter here, is repentance. So that's one example of an emphasis for a youth ministry. Second chapter is grace. So grace as the most important, so the focus, the theological conviction of a youth ministry. The third chapter is redemption, and the fourth is hope. So those are, again, they're not meant to be, these are what the core convictions ought to be. These are examples of how different youth ministers would identify what their core theological convictions are and how they would try to articulate that and put it into practice in a youth ministry. So, but you certainly are not limited to those. So there could be other things as well. It could be, relationship building. It could be discipleship. For me, I think it tended to be discipleship with some relationality in there as well. But discipleship was really kind of my core theological conviction. So you can think about what yours would be. And that feeds into the discussion question for this week, which is not so much a discussion question as much as kind of an assignment. Not like a formal writing assignment, but here's what I want you to do. I want you to imagine that you are basically in the position, this scenario that we had in Dean's intro to this section. You are writing a letter of introduction to a church as a potential youth minister. Now, this is not a cover letter. It's not like, you send in your resume and you write a little cover letter, about what your credentials are and those sorts of things. This is more personal than that, and this goes a little deeper than that. This is an introduction of yourself, and it's not so much a biography as much as a what is the most important thing to me. If you want to know what you're getting in a youth minister, what kind of youth ministry I will have, what will its focus be, this is it. So not quite a biography, but not a cover letter either. Well, again, look at the example in that, in the opening to this section to kind of see what that is. But it's really intended for the congregation and especially the parents of the youth to get to know a little bit about what makes you tick. So it's a perfect opportunity to lay out one or two of those core theological convictions. And I say, a couple. It doesn't have to be you don't have to pick just one and say, this is the most important thing. You can be well-rounded and say, maybe two, maybe even three if you want. That's kind of up to you. But I want you to imagine you're in that situation. You got to you got to introduce yourself. And this is what people are going to take as your identity. So this is that first impression that you're going to make on them. It doesn't have to be super long, but the key here is I want you to work on articulating those core theological convictions and especially talk about how you would try to live those out. How would you put them into practice? Because that's really what everyone wants to know. They want to know what are you about, what makes you tick, and how are you going to do it? So if your conviction is, let's say repentance. Well, what's that going to look like in your youth ministry? How are you going to put that into practice? Practically speaking, how are you going to lead youth to repentance? And so get creative with that. Think about how you would make that case to people who are evaluating whether or not they would want you working with their teenagers. And as far as feedback to one another, again, I do want you replying to each other, and the results on that have been, in previous weeks, kind of, some have been good, some have been, try to make sure you get that done, because, if you've been turning in your, if you've been responding to those discussion questions, but you haven't been getting, full full points on that, if you haven't been getting 9 or 10 points, there's a good chance that part of that might be if you've been answering the question for yourself, but you haven't been responding to other people's responses, then you'll lose some points on that. Because I do want this to be a discussion. I want it to be peer evaluation as well. So make sure you respond to other people. And here, when you're reading other people's responses, try to put yourself in the shoes of the congregation, or imagine you're a parent, and how would you react to this? So just a little bit of a role play, I guess is what I'm saying. Try to imagine this as sort of a role play exercise, and just have a little fun with it. And again, also make sure you're working on those papers. If you haven't gotten the review paper to me, you probably ought to do that. It's getting overdue now. And same thing with that the philosophy paper, the philosophy of youth ministry. That's due at the end of the course, and the course ends April 30th. So and when the semester ends, if I don't have that paper, for one thing, that's 40% of your grade. You're probably not going to pass without it. And they don't have a lot of wiggle room there to give you an extension on that. You don't want to take it incomplete. So if you have any questions about that paper, feel free to email me or get a hold of me some way. And good luck.